That's upside, right side up?
Right side up.
Okay, how about now?
Still good.
Okay.
Thank you.
Two of the 30 small oopsies have been conquered now, so just keep a counter going. So as I was saying, I try and represent the real world of development onto the Angular team. So as we're making everything better, we're doing it in a way that's very grounded. And so this is why I love to come and talk to communities. I love to kind of hear from developers, both all of the successes, all the things that are going really well, and the reasons why people love Angular, but also the reasons that you don't love Angular, so that we can continue to make it better. We can find pain points that we can resolve, those sorts of things. So part of my role is actually giving reports and saying like, hey, these were the most frustrating things in Angular this week. And so if you have any of those, you can always feel free to yell at me on Twitter or come find me in person all over the world. Happy to talk to anybody. So tonight we're going to talk about kind of 3 sections. So first I want to just reflect a little bit on the momentum of Angular. We've come a long way in the last couple of years. Then I'm going to talk about some of the features that came out as part of the 6.0.0 release earlier this month. And then we'll spend just a little bit of time on the future of Angular, some of the places we're headed. And I'm going to try and do a live demo, but as we've already seen, I'm doing this on a super early development Chromebook, which not a lot of people are running VS Code on a Chromebook, so I'm not in a lot of company yet. So let's get started. So when I think about momentum, I really think back to around, I think it was like April of 2016, where that was actually when I joined the team. And the first experience that I had joining the team was we released RC0 and we went to ngconf. And so for anyone that was around doing Angular 2.5 years ago, there were a little bit of uncertain times because Angular was not yet stable and AngularJS was the future was a little dubious. People didn't know what was going to happen with the future. And then you fast forward around 6 months, we finally released 2.0.0, which a lot of the developers were happy about in the community. But there was still this feeling of kind of looking over their shoulder like, oh, is this okay that I'm using Angular? Like, I like Angular, but what about everybody else? And so one of the things that we do is we try and quantify the growth of Angular. But this is actually really hard for us as a team because most of the Angular users are using it behind the firewall. So they're using it for companies. They're using it on internal tools that we have no visibility to across the internet. And so the best stand-in we can use for our sort of growth of Angular is docs traffic. So how many people are visiting the Angular documentation pages trying to learn Angular? And I always think of this. Oh. I try to think of this. I see what happened there. I try to think of this as a lower bound in terms of how many people are using Angular. So if we look back to the end of 2017, we're really seeing there's very strong, steady community growth. So at the end of last year, we actually surpassed 1 million 30-day actives, which is huge, right? That's a lot of different applications. That's a lot of different developers. And then if we flash forward even just to the beginning of this year, we are now up to around 1.25 million 30-day active users. And so even just in the last few months, this kind of huge growth curve has continued to happen. And a thank you to everyone in this room that has kind of been a part of making this happen. And so one of the ways that we think about this is coming back to the values of the Angular team. And so we talk about our values as being threefold. So first, apps that users love to use. Because at the end of the day, this is why we're building software. It's to enable users to do something, whether that's a productivity task at work, whether that's doing something fun in their free time, connecting to a community, all these sorts of tasks, it has to be about the users. And so we care about things like performance and beauty and experience and all these things. But at the same time, we don't want to forget the developer experience because that's everyone in this room who's trying to build these experiences and trying to create them for the users. And so how do we make your lives easier? How do we make better tools that better match your mental models? But then the kind of third pillar in terms of our values is a community where everyone feels welcome. And this is something that we really focus on in terms of our code of conduct, the fact that we start and do everything on the Angular team open source. So every change to Angular that happens in our repository doesn't come from within Google. It starts on GitHub as a PR, and then it gets merged in, validated against a huge number of apps, and then released open source. So we're written open source, we're released open source. And this is critical to us because without being open source, without all the huge number of community contributions, we would not be successful. Looking back at, I think, 2017, there's a huge number. I always forget the specific, but it's something like 40% of our commits came from the community. And so that's a huge number, and we want to continue to grow that. I also want to call out the meetups. You're at one right now. So congratulations. Basically, anywhere in the world, there is an Angular community. And so whenever I'm going to a new city, I'm like, hey, city name Angular meetup. And there's almost always one nearby. And so if you're not from here, is everyone from Boston or nearby? All right, you guys already know. You've got them one, you're fine. So we think about Angular as being a few different things. So from one perspective, developers really like that we have an integrated set of tools. And so we focus on things like a router, HTTP, not necessarily to limit what you can do, because while we give you all these things out of the box, you always have the freedom to swap things out. You can use different patterns, you can use different tools, but we want to give you a complete opinionated set of tools that we know are going to be validated together, we know they're going to work together. And one of the benefits that we've heard from a lot of different companies about that is that when they hire a new Angular developer onto their team, they already know the same patterns that they're using. And this is kind of a huge boost to maybe the wild west of JavaScript that we had a few years ago, where every JavaScript developer has a completely different skill set. And so this is something that we come back to on and on, thinking, okay, how can we focus on the end-to-end developer experience more, and making sure that the developer experience and everything we do is great. So now I'm going to jump in and talk a little bit about 6.0.0. How many people have already updated some test app or anything to 6.0.0? Okay, about 30% here. So one of the challenges that we have with our major versions is this balance between stability. So that is, you want to keep writing applications the way you write applications, right? You don't want to go back and have to relearn everything every time a new version comes out. But at the same time, you want the best of innovation. You want to be able to take advantage of all the new things that are happening in the JavaScript ecosystem, all the new things that are happening in browsers, without having to relearn anything that you already knew. And so the Angular team has this kind of tough problem to crack. And so this is kind of one of the major themes that we took on as part of version 6. And when we talk about versions, it's actually really important to us that we separate Angular from the version number. And so I was poking at Jeff a little bit. I'm like, can you change the name of the meetup? Because it's not like we hear people all the time using the term like Angular 6, Angular 5. We want the number to go away. Because if you're going to write a blog post or you're going to tell your boss we should use Angular, it's just Angular. Everything that you learned in 4 is going to work in 5. Everything you learned in 5 is going to work in 6. We don't have the same kind of revolutionary migration that we had from AngularJS to Angular. And we've committed to this upgrade path. And this update path is actually so important to us that we've done a lot of thinking around the mental models of how do you keep an application up to date. And so the first command that we introduced as part of our CLI in 6 is called ng-update. And so ng-update, it looks a lot like an npm or a yarn install or an add, where you can point it at a package like Angular core. But it does a bunch of things. So under the hood, this will use npm or yarn or whatever you have configured on your system to do the package manager update to the latest version of Angular core. But it does a bunch of other things as well. So we defined something called a package group. And so what you can do now on npm is you can say, hey, as part of my package.json, all of these npm packages should be kept up to date in sync. Right? So you've got core, common, compiler, et cetera. If anyone was with us as part of the 4 update or the 5 update, you probably typed npm install @ Angular / @ Angular / @ Angular /, right? It was this very long command. And so by adding package groups, we've actually eliminated that. So now I just run ng-update @ Angular / core, and I'm going to get all of the latest versions and all in sync for the Angular project. We're also able to do things like look at your peer dependencies. And so the Angular team, and Angular in general, we use peer dependencies heavily because it eliminates some of the nesting multiple version problems that people have. If we had all of our dependencies as actual dependencies in NPM, you could end up with a different version from us and a different version from one of your libraries. And that's actually a really bad thing. And so we use peer dependencies to ensure that we have a more flat structure. So there should only ever be one version of RxJS in your workspace. But the problem with that is NPM tooling is not great at keeping peer dependencies up to date. And so we've taken this problem on as part of ng-update as well, where we're now doing looking at the peer dependencies of the package you're asking for and updating those peer dependencies. So you're going to see RxJS get updated, Zone.js get updated, and even things like TypeScript are getting updated to the right version based on the dependencies that are specified there. So we're doing a lot on the kind of dependency package management side of it. So all of the other people's source code, we're trying to keep all of that code up to date. But another huge part of the ng-update command is that we're not only trying to update your dependencies, we're trying to update your code. And so one of the things we do now is we look in each of these packages that you're updating, and we say, hey, do you have a schematic to run? And I'll talk a little bit more about schematics in a bit. But if the package is capable of updating your code for you, we're going to do that automatically. And so, for example, that update RxJS command that I show there, when we do that behind the scenes, we find a schematic as part of RxJS. And that schematic says, hey, this user's moving from version 5.5 or 5 whatever to up to RxJS 6. Let's also add the compatibility package. And so this one command is doing a ton, but it's not only doing it in my dependencies, it's also adding that additional dependency to my package.json, which is really exciting. And we see that the future of this is going to kind of continue to grow. Another place where we're trying to do this is with our ng-add command. And so ng-add is, again, kind of another tool that comes as part of the Angular CLI that takes the challenge on of saying, hey, let's not just update the dependencies, let's update someone's project. And so if I create a new project with ng-new my app, I now have a bunch of packages that I can use to actually accelerate my workflow and kind of get into things faster. And so I've listed a few examples here. So if I run ng-add at angular/pwa, it's going to go into my project. It's going to just install all of these service worker dependencies I need for my project. But then it's also going to set up service worker in my application. It's going to create the application manifest that I need to beat a PWA. Same thing if I do ng-add ng-bootstrap/schematics. It will actually add all of the bootstrap and configure it for me from the ng-bootstrap project. And because we're doing all these things on top of the package managers, anyone can ship these, right? If anyone is building a library for Angular or even a library for any other tool, you can add a schematic that will automatically run when the user runs ng-add. And this is really exciting because we see this as kind of another edge where people can contribute to that ecosystem that I was talking about a little bit before. So under the hood, how are these things working? So we use a system called schematics. And so basically what schematics does is it's an open platform where it runs JavaScript to make transformations to your project. Some well-known examples of this is if you do ng-new, we're going to take an empty file system and return a full file system full of kind of this scaffolded out version of your application. If you run ng-generate, we're going to create, for example, a component, and we're going to update the references in your manifest. But then we can also do this with other things. So for example, when you update Angular material up to version 6, we're going to automatically change some of the names. Like we deprecated a few names in 5 that almost no one used, but we wanted to make the update path as smooth as possible. And so we put it in the schematic to automatically fix those parts of your code. And so this idea of using schematics gives developers a huge amount of power to both help other developers move faster with your tools and your capabilities, but also to help your developers stay up to date. When you need to make a breaking change, don't just think about breaking your change, because the old way is, right, you run your npm update and you fix everything that broke. We think that maybe there's a better mental model where you can help developers a little bit more using ASTs, right? We're not just doing regular expressions. So if you wanted to create an ng update schematic, it's pretty simple. So in my package.json, I add an ng update key, and then I specify that migrations, and that points at a collection. So schematics can come in collections where you can define a bunch of different schematics. And then you create a schematic called like RxJS migration, and then you can say, hey, when this user passes this version, we need to apply this schematic. So this is just saying, hey, run this JavaScript code when this user is coming from this version to this version. Pretty simple. ng-add looks very similar. So if I run ng-add, it's got a factory there, it's got a description, and then you can give it an alias. So I'm going to run this schematic anytime a user asks for my package. So we'll download it from npm, we'll install it in their dependencies, and then we'll run all this code. Another of the new capabilities that we released as part of the 6.0 release was called Angular Elements. And so how many people have heard of custom elements? So custom elements are a really exciting development to come to the web. So what this actually originated from a bunch of teams at Google and across the web, where they wanted a more standardized way of creating basically DOM elements, right? How do I create a packageable, reusable piece of JavaScript code where I don't have to be worrying about how this is bundled, how this is managed, et cetera, or how this is bootstrapped? And so custom elements have now landed in basically every browser as a way of doing that. So now you can create any HTML element that you want. And what we've done, and that's what custom elements is, that's the spec. You'll also hear it called web components. But we've now released a project where it takes your Angular components and allows you to ship those Angular components as custom elements. So self-bootstrapping, kind of self-hosted custom elements. And this actually is a really big deal for things like CMSs, where previously, like on Angular IO, if I wanted to put some rich piece of functionality into my content, I would write that content as HTML, and then I would write a JavaScript code, Angular code, to look through that content, find all the things that needed to be bootstrapped, that needed to be kind of upgraded into live functionality, and then manually upgrade each one. But using custom elements, using Angular elements, I can now create an Angular element that I store directly in my content. And then instead of having to bootstrap it from the Angular layer, you can actually bootstrap it from the browser layer. Yeah.
How does Angular elements compare to Stencil?
They are very different projects because Stencil, I don't want to speak too much on their behalf. I would say ask Mike if you have more questions about this, but Stencil is really designed to be more lightweight, whereas Angular, we want to give you the full power of taking your Angular code and shipping it as a custom element. Another highly requested feature that we shipped in version 6 was ng-generate library. So now, as an Angular developer, we had a bunch of guidance in terms of what we wanted your packages to look like previously, but now we've baked that in by actually leveraging some of the work from an open source contributor called David Hergis, who built a tool called ng-packager, where he's internalized our package format, all the different kind of formats that you should be shipping to NPM, and he built a tool to do that for you. And then we baked that now into the CLI. So when you run ng-generate library, you're going to get out a blank library with all the build tooling set up, and then you can go on and maintain that. And so this was one of the main challenges we saw from and heard from developers, because basically every developer out in the world is building a component library, right? Whether you're doing it today or whether you're doing it next year, you're building a component library, you're using a component library. This is true for every company we're working with, right? So big company X UI is typically the name that they've chosen, but we've also heard some very interesting ones. Like one of my favorites was Kite. I don't know why, like they've got logos of kites all over the place. And then you've got things like Clarity from VMware. So lots of really good examples of building libraries and then using that as a platform to kind of drive adoption. All right, so as I said, we're 2 out of 30 things that can go wrong done. But I want to actually give a demo of some of these things and show you them in action. So I'm going to jump over and try and share my screen again for the live stream. Is anyone in the other room?
I don't think so.
But they're probably watching online. So part of the goal here is I'm going to start with a V5 app because a lot of us still have version 5 apps. I'm going to update to V6 very quickly. And then I'm going to add a couple capabilities. Then we're going to generate some starter components using some of the new tools in Angular Material. We'll add a library, and then we'll see if we have time for elements. Otherwise, we can jump into Q&A. All right, so I have here an Angular application. Let's make sure everyone can see this. Can I turn this into... All right, so if I look at ng version, can everyone in the room see this? I don't think live stream can, but so you'll see we're running Angular CLI 1.7 and Angular 5.2.11. Now, I'm going to follow the process that one would normally follow. There's actually been some issues. I don't know if anyone heard about the NPM issues this morning. There was an issue where if you were using any sort of proxy, all NPM servers responded, "I'm a little teapot," which is not good for demos. And then I ran into some other internet issues. So it's not my fault if it works. My code all works perfectly. All right, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to first install the latest version of the CLI. So I'm going to yarn add Angular/CLI. This should be really fast because I did this like an hour ago. But I'm sure because everyone's here, it won't be. So what this is doing is this is just doing a pure npm install or yarn install of the latest version of the CLI. So if I run ng version here, I'm going to see that I'm on CLI version 6. But there's actually something that happened as part of our update to version 6. Is we actually migrated from a .angular-cli.json file to an angular.json file. And the reason we did this is to better support larger projects or workspaces where you have multiple projects. Maybe you have a universal app and a client-side app and a library. And these things kind of kept happening more and more organically. These projects would grow, and it was very hard to manage the workspaces previously. And so by changing the format, we've kind of offered a couple new capabilities and made this much cleaner. And so if we want to actually update to that format automatically, I can use ng-update to do that. So I'm going to ng-update at angular/CLI. And what it's going to do is it's going to rewrite my angular CLI.json file into an angular.json file, and then run all of the npm installs to get me to the dependencies. And so I'm sure things are going to fail here. So let's live on the edge. So here you can see it deleted our Angular CLI, created a Angular JSON, and it also updated our Karma config, our package.json, TS-lint to just follow all the latest best practices. All right, and then there's the dreaded yarn install that we're waiting for. All right, let's create a new window here. And I don't know if you can see this, but I'm actually demoing using a Pixelbook, using some of the new things that we launched at Google I/O. So now you can actually run a full development environment on a Chrome OS device. So this is still in the dev channel, so this is not instable. And so you'll see the fun that comes with running on the dev channel. All right, so if we go into our workspace, we go into our demo, and we go into my app, we should be able to run VS Code here. Should be able to. All right, if not, we can just go old school. So if we look in our project, this is the new config. So you can see you've got a project. So then within every project, you've got a bunch of what are called targets. So you've got the normal ones, build, serve, things like that. And then every target has a set of configurations. So production, development, staging, all these sorts of things. And the nice thing is all of the command line flags that you used to have, they are now also, there's a 100% parity between the command line flags and the options you can put in here. So you never have to worry about one of your developers doing like ng serve with the wrong settings or ng build with the wrong settings. You can bake all of those things into the config file, so you don't have to worry about that anymore. All right, let's see how we're doing here. All right, so that's finished. So now we're running the CLI version 6, but we actually want to use Angular version 6. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to do ng update at angular/core, just like I showed before. And this will do all the things that I talked about. So it's going to update all of the Angular dependencies. It's going to update RxJS. It's going to update TypeScript. And if there's any warnings, I'm going to try it again with the --force flag. All right, and while this is actually going, I'm going to try one more time to run VS Code. I really wish I had VS Code right. What I'm going to do is I'm going to open a new component. Actually, I'll just do an existing component. Done this. So what I want to do is I want to use RxJS because we all use RxJS as Angular developers. So I'm going to do this kind of the old way. So I'm going to say constructor. We're going to write some code here, and then in the constructor, I'm going to say const, let's say data equals observable.of. And then I'm going to map that data. So I'm going to say const value equals data.map. All right, so I've created an observable here with the value hello Boston, and then I'm creating a new observable based on a mapping of this. Hopefully, everyone's seen this before? All right, but you'll notice I'm doing this kind of the older way. So before version 5.5 of RxJS, this was how we did things, but we've actually changed things a little bit. So you would probably need a bunch of imports. So I'd need observable from RxJS/observable, import RxJS/add/operator map, import RxJS/add observable of. So these are what we call side effecty imports because they actually modify the prototype of the observable, which is bad because we then can't tree shake it away if it's not used. We can't, if you do this in 2 of your files that both require it and you remove the import in one, it'll still work, which doesn't match kind of developer expectations. You don't know where the code is happening that makes your code work. And so this should work. We'll see. We're going to run ng serve, and we're going to try this out. Oh, need a new version of TypeScript. So let's just fix that. I love helpful errors. There's kind of 3 levels of error. There's one that can tell you what's wrong. There's one that can tell you what you should be doing instead, or there's one that fixes you automatically. So this is the 2nd level. Someday I hope we can get to the 3rd level. All right, so while we're waiting for that, so let's try ng serve again. All right, so while I'm doing this, I'm going to also create another element that we're going to use a little bit later. So I'm going to create a new component called myElement. That's a little weird. Am I in the same project I was in earlier? All right, so let's just check up on our little checklist here. So we started with the V5 app. We've now updated to V6. And then we're going to add a bunch of different capabilities once we have our V6 app ng serving properly. Another pro tip, don't try and mix yarn and NPM. It's just a recipe for a bad time. All right, 10% chance this is going to work. What are we at? So we had a budget of 30. We got like 8 now. %, chunk asset allocation. Hey, it worked, and we're on Angular 6. So I did a lot of clicking around just so that you didn't have to wait. So I'm kind of pipelining some of the steps. It really was just the 2 commands plus the TypeScript fix. So I updated the CLI with ng update Angular CLI from the latest. I ng updated at Angular/core, and I ng served. So I have done a lot of work on this laptop. And so I have a bunch of really corrupted globals. Normally, it should be automatically figuring out that you need TypeScript 2.7. It did not for me. So I'd be happy to show that, except we've lost our scroll back. So basically what it said is, hey, something in your global space wants TypeScript 2.5, so I'm going to install 2.5. And so Force just said, do it anyway. And then I had to manually install 2.7. Mm-hmm. Sure. If you have any peer dependencies that we cannot resolve safely via the package manager, we will throw warnings and stop. But the -- force flag always works. Works. For some definition of works, it always works. All right, so we have an Angular application. And if you remember, we have that sweet RxJS component that's written the wrong way. Do you guys remember that one? So if we go back into source app, so we have this old way, side effect to imports, but as part of the 6.0 update, we actually updated RxJS 6, and we added this backwards compatibility library called RxJS compat. But luckily, there's a tool that actually helps us do this called RxJS 5.6 migrate. So this is just available in NPM. You just install it globally, and you point it at your tsconfig. I think it's here. Yep. I'm going to say -p tsconfig.app.json. And what it's going to do is it's going to use tslint rules under the hood to kind of auto-magically update my component. And so I've heard only success stories of this. If you run into any problems with this, let us know. We'll fix them. So what it did is it fixed 5 warnings and 2 errors. And so now if I look at my component, we should now see I'm no longer importing observable. I'm no longer importing it from the wrong path. I'm no longer adding with side effecty operators. And it's even rewritten my use of data.map into data.pipe. So I apologize. Yeah, this is huge. I apologize to anyone who did this before we released the tool that does it automatically. All right, so yeah.
Quick question. Does it rewrite some of your tests if you happen to use mock or stub function or does it change that as well?
If you are testing, or if you have .map in your tests in a way that the type system can infer, yes, it'll fix that. It's not a panacea for all tests. Tests are more likely to be broken than real code, I would say. I would also, I talked to a lot of developers about this, and maybe 10, 20% of the time I find out that they're trying to test RxJS. In general, don't try and test your dependencies. Just assume they're gonna work. I mean, they're gonna break sometimes, but test your functionality and then rely on your kind of vendors and tooling providers to fix theirs. All right, so we have an app. It's on v6. We're actually using the latest and greatest RxJS. So now I'm gonna use ng add, and I'm gonna add a few capabilities. So first, I'm gonna add @angular/pwa. And so what this should do is it should download the @angular/pwa dependency into my project, which is just resolved by the package manager. And then it's going to automatically create the application manifest, and it's going to create, it's project -- project equals my app.
What is PWA?
PWA stands for Progressive Web App, which is a collection, it's a term we give to the collection of kind of modern web applications that are taking advantage of things like offline push notifications, high performance, as well as kind of this overall mental shift from websites to web applications, where in a website you could have a loosely correlated set of, like, you could have a different file generate every page of your site. Whereas with a web application, all of the pages are coming from a single application with a kind of a shared context, shared mindset. If you think of all the way back to like 2004, Gmail was one of the first web apps. And then the progressive term is, hey, some browsers are getting more and more capabilities. Let's opt into those whenever possible. And so the biggest one is Service Worker, which allows you to proxy incoming requests from your application so that even if you're offline, you can actually intercept those requests and respond with a cached version. So this one command, and I'll show you a couple of things it did. So one of the things it did is it created this ngsw-config file. I wish I had VS Code. So what this is actually doing is, so Angular team, we've built our own service worker with kind of a better life cycle that tries to more closely match developer expectations than the spec. So we're kind of building it on top of the spec. And so what happens is when you do a build of your application now, it's going to tell the browser, hey, these are all the files I need to run my application. So I need my favicon, I need my index.html, I need all my JavaScript files, all my CSS files that are rendered by Webpack. And then it puts those in a manifest and then downloads them to the user's computer. And then you can even install assets and cache assets as soon as you have complete control over the caching. So you can only cache them, for example, when you see something. So if you only want a user to be able to revisit content they've already seen, you can do that as well. So it's all about the kind of balance of how much do I want to be pushing down the pipe and when. You can do things like optimize for freshness. So maybe I want the content, we should always try the network first, and if the network fails, then I'm going to fall back to the cached version. Or you can do performance, where I'm going to just serve the cached version, and then I'll update the online version later at some point. All right, so we've got now our applications of PWA. I won't spend too much time because I think we're running out here. So I'm going to now do the next thing. So I'm going to ng add @angular/material. So what this will do is this will go download the Angular material dependency. The Angular material project also has a dependency on something called the CDK, or the component dev kit. So it's going to install that for me as well. And then it's going to go ahead and kind of set it up in my app module. and then install a theme for me into my index.html and my CSS files. So out of the box, we've now set up kind of Angular material so it's ready to use. But one of the cool things you can do with this is it installs a bunch of additional schematics into the project. And so now I can do ng-generate at angular/material, and then I'm going to forget the name. I think that's it. All right, I think that worked. Let's take a look. So if you'll see it, just like generating a component with ng-generate, I've now generated a material dashboard. And so if we look at the HTML file here, it's instead of having to kind of start from the ground up with Angular material, this is giving you a starter component. So it's got a grid, it's iterating over a list, it's got all these kind of very nice things just showing you an example that you can then go and modify. We call these starter components. And so let's actually go and use my dash. Let's just modify our. So is that what I called it? Hopefully that's right. And are we already ng serving? No. So I've blown away the tutorial app now, and I've replaced it with a single my dash component, which we scaffolded out by these starter components here. So as soon as the ng-serve works, all right, now we have a dashboard. So this might not look that impressive because of the high screen res, but it's responsive, so everything kind of collapses as necessary. You get these nice card actions. So a lot of the things that you might want as a developer kind of exist now out of the box. So let's use another terminal so we don't have to keep doing this. So let's, there's two other starter components I'm going to show off just really quick. So there's a material table. And I'm definitely going to get the name of this one wrong. I always forget if it's side nav or nav. It's nav. The more you know, right? All right, so let's go in and we're going to replace my dash with my table, and then we'll do my nav real quick. So these are just Angular components scaffolded out by the CLI for you. So here we have a data table, right? How many data tables have we built? Probably lots. But this one comes with pagination, comes with how many items per page you want. You've got these nice sorts. And because we used ng-add at Angular/material, it already set up the themes, it already set up animations. So you get things like these nice like arrows that flip up and down, all those sorts of cool things that you want from a fully manifested Angular material application. All right, and the next thing we're going to do here is we're going to just edit that one more time and say my nav. And there you go. So this is a basic navigation. You can see, again, it's responsive. So if it's too small, I get this nice little menu that pops out. If it's big enough, everything is available all the time. And under the hood, this is a fully scaffolded thing out. So you can see what links should look like, what the menu, how to make it responsive, how to open and close it, all those sorts of really amazing things. So that is the starter components that came out as part of 6. If you want to change the style of the material, yeah, so you can either create your own theme. We offer a bunch of pre-built themes, or you can use a pre-built theme and modify it. So yeah, I mean, this is just standard Angular material. We're just trying to help you move faster by setting up a lot of these things for you in a way that you had to do yourself completely kind of from scratch in the past.
Is your documentation making your own starter components?
So making your own starter components would be the exact same as making any of your own schematics. So there is documentation on how to make schematics. So like ng-generate component does a very similar thing to ng-generate material nav. It's just instead of generating a blank component, it generates a fully built out component. Does that make sense? So there is documentation on how to build a schematic. Follow that, or take a look at, it's all open source, so you could take a look at the starter components and just fork them if you wanted. We see a lot of developers doing that. All right, so next up, I'm going to ng-generate library called mylib. It's another one of those cool things. So it's created using the new CLI format, project/mylib, with a karma test, ng package config, tests, and then mylib module, mylib component, mylib service. That's it. I now have a library, right? I can go modify these files. I can go put components in them. And then whenever I want to give this to someone in a shippable manner, I want to put it on NPM, I just do npm build or ng build -- project equals mylib. This has been going too well, so I'm pretty sure this is going to fail. Yeah. All right. So we'll come back to that one. All right. So the last thing I want to do is I want to try out Angular elements. So I'm going to say, do we have more time? OK. So ng add @angular/elements. And so what this is going to do is it's going to install the Angular elements package, and it's also going to install a polyfill, because there's actually a really weird state of the world right now when it comes to custom elements, because custom elements as a spec requires an ES6 or an ES 2015 module or an ES 2015 class. But most of us as developers, we should be shipping ES5 to the browser because we have older browsers that can't access ES 2015. You have things like the Google crawler that can't access ES 2015. And so you have to ship ES5 to your browser. But to take advantage of the new features, you need ES6. So what this polyfill does is it basically creates a class and then wraps it around the ES5 that was down leveled from the ES6 you wrote, or the TypeScript you wrote. So it's a little bit roundabout, but I think as browsers continue to improve, as crawlers continue to improve, I see a future where we can just ship ES 2015 or ES Next to the browser. All right. So what we're going to do we still have an ng-serve going? Yes. So I believe I created an element. No, I didn't. So ng-generate component, my-element. So if we take a look at this HTML, it's just going to say my element works. Pretty standard. This is anytime you generate a component, that's what you're going to see. And now what we're going to do is we're going to go into our app component, and I'm going to bootstrap that as a custom element instead of as my element. If we look at the TypeScript, actually, before we leave this, you'll notice it's got the selector app my element. So if I wanted to bootstrap this as an Angular component, I would bootstrap it as app my element. But we're not actually going to do that. Instead, I'm going to go into my app component.ts file, and I'm going to import. This is going to be really hard without create custom, without IntelliSense. So this is that new method that comes as part of Angular elements, create custom element. Then I'm going to import custom element component from, I'm just guessing here. Maybe that'll work. All right, and then what we're going to do is we're going to add in our constructor. We're going to need access to the injector. So I'm going to say private injector of type injector, which I also need to import from core. This demo takes half as long when I've got VS Code working. All right, then I'm going to create an ng on init method, where I'm going to say let lm equal create custom element. And I'm going to pass it two things. I'm going to pass it the custom element, so custom element component, and I'm going to pass it the injector, which because we injected it via the injector, we have it in this.injector. Try saying that 5 times fast. And then we're going to use the browser's native functionality, so which I think is just custom elements.define. We're going to pass it a selector, so we'll call it my element. Remind me of that. I'm going to forget that. And then you pass it the element. And then we got to make sure our close brackets all match up because the ID is not doing it for me.
Encapsulation native.
Yes.
implements on it for the component.
You don't need that. It's recommended. All right. So two more things I need to do is I need to say, hey, we have this new element. But if I don't refer to it from any of my templates, the Angular compiler is actually going to ignore it. And so what I need to do is I need to say entry components. Components. I'm not used to spelling things. And does that match my element component? OK, good so far. And then we're going to say schemas. So one of the things that Angular does is when we're compiling your templates, we actually check and make sure that every HTML tag you use is either part of the HTML spec or coming from your Angular application. This is how we eliminated the problem where in AngularJS or other places, you'd have this weird typo where like I'd use a tag that doesn't exist and it would refer to a component or a controller that didn't exist. And you'd have this mismatch. But so normally we do validation to prevent that. But I'm actually going to turn that off. So custom elements schema. And what do you do when you don't know something? You bang it. I like that answer. Hey, look, I think I spelled it right. All right, and I'm sure TypeScript will tell me all the things I've done wrong in about 30 seconds here. Custom element component.
I think it's top.
Maybe.
My element component?
It was my element component. There you go. Who said that? You get a pair of Angular sunglasses.
No way.
You didn't know there were prizes, did you? Everyone's going to go home like, oh, what'd you do tonight? Oh, I watched someone use Vim for half an hour. I know. Yeah, that was the first thing I learned. My element component? Is that better? How's the rest of the code? Good? Oh, sure. You only get one pair of sunglasses. That's all I got. All right, so did we have an empty serve running? No. All right, if this works without an IDE, you're all going to have to clap. We're going to see, though. Oh. Such a simple mistake, too. Very easy to fix, though. Does this make you feel better about building Angular apps? That everyone makes stupid mistakes? We're all in this together. There was a question. Sure. So what the custom element schema does is it effectively just turns off the validation, because we don't yet have a schema for custom elements. The Angular team, we've thought about making one, but we'd rather there be a standard so that there's an interoperability layer. So. All right, this one I think is also easy to fix. Oh, did I leave the docs up? Where do I import this from? Angular core, great. Was there one more? An import path cannot end with a TS. Good advice. We have another question. I keep thinking your hands are up back there, just because if you look behind you. Yeah. Is this compatible with native script? Which part? Which Angular is compatible with NativeScript, absolutely. 6.0.0, yes, it will work with with NativeScript. And one of the things we're working on with that team is we actually want hybrid projects, so you can have a single Angular project with .html files and .tns files. So where it works on some of the Progress team members' machines, but obviously we want to make it work on everyone's machine. So what we're going to get to is like ng add NativeScript, where it takes any existing Angular application and then adds in the machinery, so you could actually do even builds from the Angular CLI. So we want a single, like, use the ng tool chain to do NativeScript builds or non-NativeScript builds, all those sorts of things. Okay, I'm skeptical, but this says this worked. Custom element schema is not defined. Is that still a problem? Okay, so the app is working, but we didn't put anything in the HTML. But that should be fine. So I'm going to go crazy here. I don't know if this is going to work, but what if we delete the app root? And then we edit our body tag. Theoretically, if I put my element in here, so with no bootstrapping from Angular whatsoever, I should just be able to put this in here, and my element works. So now we have an Angular component that was written, had access to the dependency injection system. You could use services, you could use HTTP client, you could use animations, all of the features of Angular being bootstrapped by the browser. This is a really big deal. So
where does it come from? It wasn't.
Where is Angular?
No, like, where does the element come from? How does your browser know that this HTML tag is custom?
So if you recall, we wrote 2 lines of code here. Yeah. So we did 2 things specific to this custom element. We called this create custom element method, and we passed it the Angular component. So what that does is it creates an object that is suitable to be passed to the browser, because it does all the property binding with the native functionality of the browser. And then we called the native browser's custom elements.define, gave it a selector, and we gave it that element that we just got back.
That's cool.
I agree. All right, so we're just a couple more slides to finish up. So V6, pretty cool. I think we're starting to see a lot of the potential. So in many ways, the V6 update, it's preparing for kind of a long, healthy future for Angular, right? You've got ng update now, you've got ng add, so developers can move faster, they can stay up to date. Obviously, this will be kind of easier and easier with every release. So I mean, I have hopes and dreams that maybe just one ng update command could do everything. In general, now you won't have to update the CLI first. You can just run ng update, it'll just kind of work. Same with kind of custom elements. So right now, custom elements works inside of an Angular application, but we're working on the tool chain that will allow you to take an Angular element and then ship it as a JavaScript file that you can give to someone else. So let's say you have another team at your company that's using another JavaScript library, or they're writing pure vanilla JavaScript. The idea is right now you have to have Angular for this to work, but we would love it to work in a non-Angular context. So that is coming. One last thing on the V6. We have update.angular.io. If you want to know about any of the steps that we followed here today, this is a guide that we built to walk you through them. So you put in the version you're coming from, the version you're going to, and then you say whether you have npm or yarn, and then it will walk you through the steps. So here's all the things you can do before you update. So things we recommended in the past, such as moving from HTTP module to HTTP client module, then run these commands. And then here's all the things you can do later. Like you can remove once all of your dependencies aren't using the RxJS v5 features anymore, you can actually remove those dependencies and sorts of things. So if you, this is intended to be a semantic layer on top of our changelog. So if you ever want to get crazy and you want to know everything that's changed in Angular, just switch over to advanced and you'll see kind of all of the little minutia. So if I even go from an earlier version, let's go from 4. Now let's go all the way back, right?
You go 146.
No. So warning, we don't recommend moving across multiple major versions. So just do it one at a time. So like everything from renderer.invoke element method. How many people were calling renderer.invoke element method? Exactly. That's why we have an advanced button. I just stick it on basic usually, even though I built it. All right, the future. We announced a project called Angular for Designers. I won't go too into depth with this, but basically we want Angular to be easier for designers, and we want more collaboration and cooperation between people that consider themselves designers and people that consider themselves developers. Because across the industry, there's a lot of handoffs where a designer makes a thing and they give it to a developer, and then the developer remakes the thing and the designer says that's not right. Anyone seen this, done this? Yeah. So we'd like to look for ways that these things can be kind of built more in tandem or a single source of truth. One of these examples is a CloudKit or a cloud-based prototyping tool. So this is something that we're working on Google. We're using Google to build prototypes of Google Cloud Platform, where you can kind of just drag and drop working components into an interface designer. We're looking to externalize this and make this available to the world. No timeline on that, but this is something we're working on because we think that if designers were empowered to use real components, that would mean that they could never design something that would be impossible, right? Which would be a huge win for all of us. We've also been working on something called Ivy. And so under the hood, between versions 2 and 4, we rewrote our rendering engine called the View engine basically from scratch. No one really noticed except that their bundles got 60% smaller. We're looking to do that again, but we're talking a little bit more about it because a lot of people have expressed interest in what's going on under the hood. And so with Ivy, what we're doing is we're basically inverting the way that we construct the rendering pipeline. So in V6 and before, what we would do is we would generate a bunch of instructions, which would basically be interpreted by the Angular core runtime. What we're doing instead is we're getting rid of that kind of two-step process, and we're generating instructions now as of Ivy that pull in the parts of Angular you need. And so this isn't ready yet, so we're still working on the compiler, we're still working on the runtime. Once those are done, then we'll work on validating it across the 600 plus apps that use Angular and Google. We'll validate it with partner apps. We'll make it opt-in, anyone can try it. And then we'll switch everyone to it by default because we're kind of very sure of backward compatibility. But the magic is you will only have to pay for the Angular features you use, because if your code does not use a feature, it won't be pulled in. And so we're seeing hello worlds the size of 2.7K. And so this would be huge. Obviously, real world apps are going to use more features, and you're going to pull in more code. But even if you do use all the features of Angular, I would contend that you're probably not using all of the features of Angular at once. And so if you combine this with our concept of kind of lazy loading, splitting your application into modules, we can only pull in the parts of Angular that you need in the modules where you need them, right? Which we couldn't do this before because you needed kind of all the parts because we couldn't tree shake. We didn't know what you were going to use, what you weren't going to use. But by inverting the relationship between the templates that you write in Angular so that your code is pulling in Angular, we're only going to include the things you need in the chunks that are using them. And so we're very excited about that. So we've had a lot of glitches, but we actually made it through surprisingly well. NPM, the internet worked. So thank you all. And that's it for me. We can do some Q&A. All right, Q&A.
Angular furthering the definitions of what components, and you could close that in?
So we participate in some of those conversations. So for example, there's conversations going on in the standards body about what if there was a web native templating system? What could that look like? Could we take advantage of that? So we're participating in those conversations. But in general, web components they're a standard now, and they've shipped in almost all the browsers.
But we're building a lot of Angular.
Yep.
It would be nice to turn them into it.
Yes, and Angular elements will you can do that today in an Angular context. So if you're building a CMS, like for my blog or whatever, if I want to enrich some of my content, I can just use custom elements. I don't have to do any manual bootstrapping. We did this on Angular IO, so we were the first biggest user of Angular elements. But we want to make it redistributable so anyone can use it. And I think part of the problem is today you wouldn't want to take the 150 KB uncompressed Angular code and ship that with every element. But when you think about a model like the Ivy rendering pipeline, now it's small enough that you want to ship that everywhere. Other questions? Yeah.
I'm puzzled by the elements. If you're an all Angular application, what's the advantage of using an element as opposed to just a component?
So
I get where you're going, where you hand it off to someone,
Yep.
place it doesn't do that.
So Angular works fantastic, and it's actually a very secure model because we have a complete separation of content and code. Because we're doing the ahead of time compilation of templates even, there's no way for you to get code or functionality out of content. The content necessarily stays dormant. And so if I wanted to build a blog where I load an article and then I see, oh, this article has a poll, and I want a live poll that the user can decide they want dynamically as part of the content, we have to do a bridging between content and code. So in version 5, you would have to do that manually. You'd have to look for all of those poll tags and then dynamically bootstrap that into an Angular component. But with elements, now I can create an Angular element for that poll and then embed it directly in my content. And then Angular doesn't need to worry about how to bootstrap that. So it allows you to embed functionality in content in a way that doesn't violate the secure model of separation between the two. So like Angular.io is a great example. So all of our code examples are now Angular elements stored as code or stored as just static stuff in a markdown file. And then we enrich it after the fact.
Just really quick to
Sure.
add to that. So like one way that we're using it that might give context is that, so for some of our new stuff, we build our server-side rendered apps fully like just server views, and we just have Angular elements for like just small little pieces. So you don't have to build like the entire thing. I mean, there's different use cases, but that's one of them where I found it like really useful as like just having that like kind of smaller reusable piece.
Is Angular.io open source? Could I see that?
Angular.io is open source.
I can check out that markdown file. I guess.
Yes, there's a lot of them though. I'll warn you. So here's Angular.io. It's directly in the Angular GitHub repo. So it's AIO. And then you can see all of the content, the scripts, the build, etc. So we actually do testing on our code samples. So one of the things that happens is like let's say we have a code sample that lives on AIO for getting started or whatever. That will live as code that then actually as part of a build process will be turned into like a StackBlitz live app. And then we reference that from within our example. So we actually have a more complex pipeline. So like that's what this examples folder is these are all real examples with tests and things like that to make sure so we always know our examples work, which is kind of nice. But then if you look at the guide, these are all just markdown files. Yeah, send a PR. Yeah, we want to get two things on the site, or obviously there's an infinite number of things we want to do to the site, but two that we want to add soon is I want to add a star this repo. Because apparently people really care about stars. So if you haven't starred the Angular repo, go for it. And we also want to make like an edit this page button so that it jumps you directly into the GitHub editor. You had a question.
The guidance for gotchas on lazy loading third-party libraries with Angular 6 upgrade, that's something that work out of the box.
I'm not aware of any gotchas. So theoretically, you would be loading that library as part of one of your lazy loaded modules.
Correct.
So you're not lazy loading their code. You're putting their code in a lazy loaded module that you control.
No, it's a bundle
Okay.
that we reference, a pure JavaScript bundle that we've defined in the old Angular CLI.json.
Sure.
It got migrated into Angular.json. So it's defined as a bundle in this, but it's somehow not getting, we're not able to reference it the same way that we were to bootstrap it in the application, in the lazy loading module, in the routing guard for the lazy loading module that
Sure.
we did before.
So I don't know what's going on there, but I'd be happy to take a look at that with you. Or if you follow a bug, that would be a great way to make sure the team follows up. Sure, go ahead. Oh.
Do you have a question? Me? Oh, sorry, what's the future for Zone?
Zone, okay. So how many people know what zone is? Okay. So that's actually really interesting because zone is actually a thing that we tried to get into the web standards, but it's been a little bit dormant in the standards track, and so we're looking at kind of what it should be long term. Zone is where we wrote JavaScript code to monkey patch every asynchronous event in the browser. So XHRs, timeouts, basically anything you can do that happens asynchronous as part of the native browser functionality. We have patched into that, and we figure out if that code was invoked from within an Angular method, we can then use that to determine that we need to run change detection again. This zones causes problems when you use custom JavaScript. So let's say you have Firebase, where they are creating their own events on top of WebSockets, those sorts of things. We can't monkey patch those, and so Angular change detection might not be automatically triggered. So we're looking at ways of making zones optional. So it's already optional today. As of I think 5.0, you could turn zones off in your application and then manually call change detection. But we're looking at ways of making it ergonomic to do automatic triggering of change detection whenever using like a reactive pattern, like an observable. We can automatically do this. And then you can get rid of zones, then we don't have to do monkey patching. We don't have weird, I'm using this browser feature that I invented and it doesn't trigger change detection. It will, so if you want to use Angular without zones, it will mean faster performance, but it will mean that you have to manually think about change detection. So there's definitely some trade-offs there that we're thinking about. A lot of developers rely on zones, so I don't think zones is going away, but it might become optional. If we can do a good job enough of making it automatic when it should be happening. So like imagine like, you know the async pipe? Imagine if we created a pipe called push, where you just did pipe push, and then anytime that observable emitted a value, we knew that that subtree needed change detection. So it's cool ideas there. Yeah.
So I am also making a component library like everybody else in the world.
Congratulations. What's it called?
NGX share. So we have the shared component library. Anyways, I've been trying to make it an official Angular library before ng packager, I think.
Oh, you have a packaging tool.
So no. I was using ng packager.
Yeah.
Before that, I was using scripts, and there were a whole bunch of projects like copy and pasting scripts.
Yes, like Philip Silva's and.
Yeah.
Yep.
So now ng packager is getting rolled into the CLI.
It is, I wouldn't say rolled into. There's an important distinction there. So ng packager is an open source project, which we are using in our CLI. So I would not say we are like, I don't think we're planning on taking ownership of ng packager.
Okay.
Just
contributing to it?
Yes.
Like a lot? There's been a lot of changes.
I don't know.
Okay. Anyways, I feel like there's a lot of fundamental changes to how you have to use something as simple as package.json and changing everything over to peer dependencies. And have to do that if you're using ng packager. There's some warnings that come up now that I'm assuming Google added.
Possibly.
There are so many changes going on there, and like there's something fundamental like package.json that I don't feel like anybody's talking about. So like I feel like I'm out of the loop.
So we are not the main innovators on that, it looks like. We're not in the top 6 contributors in ng packager. So I can't comment on evolution there.
So the peer dependencies, or the shift to peer dependencies, is that something that you guys are driving?
So there's something called the Angular package format, which is our recommendation of best practices of what you should ship to NPM to be future-proof. Because this problem keeps getting more and more complex, where you have to ship like an ES5 version, an ES5 version with ES 2015 modules, and an ES 2015 version. Like it keeps getting worse because there's more ways that people can pull your code in. So like IDEs require one format, Webpack requires another format. And so we keep updating our packaging format to try and reflect the best, most future-proof way of doing those things. But the way these tools are all being used continue to evolve. And so that's part of why we built ng-generate library and ng-update, is so that our hope is anytime we can tool that to kind of insulate you from the changes that are happening across the web, we want to do that.
I would just say that I feel like the changes are what you're trying to do to make the Angular package format meet OS criteria and work for everybody. Somebody should be talking about that. It's like I know what the Angular package format is, like the Google Doc. I found that
Sure.
somehow magically and tried to implement it, but I don't. To try and go through all of this.
This is the doc he's talking about.
To try and go through all this to get actual Angular library working, it seems like there should have been an easier way to do it a long time ago. But if
Yes, we want to make that better. We are somewhat at the limits of what all the other tooling vendors do. So like if we could drop one of these and just have one format, that would be better. Totally agree. Part of what we're doing around Ivy will actually enable some of that. So in Ivy, you can actually ship like ES 2015, you could ship compiled components and modules to NPM, which would eliminate a bunch of this complexity. The problem is you have a balance between how much tooling do you want to own before build or before distribution, and how much tooling do your developers want to own after distribution. So, because if you do it before, then they have no flexibility. They have no freedom to compile to different targets, to run it in universal, all those sorts of things. But if you wait to do it after, they might do it differently than you, and then it might not be compatible. And so that's why we have the fact that you have to ship ESM 2015, ESM 5, ESFESM 5. That's this trying to strike a balance between compiling before, so where you have control in a way that doesn't limit the freedom of people using your stuff. If you have contributions, love more input and feedback and help. Awesome. Where's this file located? Google Angular package format.
just use ng package or generate.
Yeah, don't go and build this yourself if you can help it.
I forked over the material package builder, and then I went over to that package builder. Wanted to know, at least the unseen it was actually.
So for example, in your material, they are in the midst of changing from like an SH script into Bazel. Angular is now being compiled with Bazel. So we're very excited about the future of Bazel, but it's a long way to make it easy for other developers.
Another build tool.
Yeah. Was that Bazel.build?
Great. Let's give it a round for